Every great leader has a defining story, a pivotal moment that challenged them, changed them, and revealed how they truly lead. Leadership Unlocked explores those stories and the tools that emerge from them, giving listeners a model of intentional, resilient, and values-driven leadership. Welcome to Leadership Unlocked, where we uncover the pivotal stories that shape extraordinary leaders. I'm Dusty Holcomb, and on this show, we don't just talk about leadership, we seek to decode it. In every episode, we sit down with change makers who've walked through the fire, challenged the status quo, and emerged with wisdom worth sharing. These aren't just lessons, let's be real. They're lived experiences, real moments that reveal the mindset, the resilience, and the clarity that comes behind and for lasting impact. Today, you're going to hear one of those stories. He built the dream career, big clients, big names, big creative wins, and then he watched it fall apart. That unraveling became a turning point. Today, Sean Keller helps high-performing entrepreneurs align their business, faith, and purpose so they stop striving and start leading from a deeper place. This episode isn't about building more. It's about building better from the inside out. Let's get into it. This is Leadership Unlocked. Sean, brother, friend, thank you for joining me today. I've been so looking forward to this conversation.
This is an honor. Yeah, this is going to be awesome. I'm glad to be here.
Well, let's just jump right in. You know, in my intro, I read up on you and I studied, and you've started at age 16 at the highest possible level and just have had all kinds of fun adventures. Why don't you just start there? Like when you were a kid, did you ever dream that you would be sitting here, leading, high powered, entrepreneurs, very successful people in unlocking purpose? Like how did you get here, man?
Well, I can tell you confidently, 5 years ago, I didn't think that was going to be the case. So certainly not when I was young. Yeah, I mean, it's interesting that you brought that up because when I was 7, I went to a really small elementary school. We lived in a small community. It's called Sussex, Wisconsin. It's a kind of a small rural, sort of suburbia meets rural blend. And it's just outside of Milwaukee, about 45, 50 minutes. At our elementary school, we would do these, I don't know if this is still around, but we would do these fundraisers where you get this packet and you get, cookies and pizzas and, all these kind of random things. And the prize at the end of it that I really wanted, I don't think any of the other kids wanted this, but it was this point and shoot camera that would print the photos, basically like a knockoff, Kodak kind of thing or Fujifilm kind of thing. It was horrible. Don't ever recommend winning a fundraiser camera. But that's the earliest seed that I can think of. As I went around and I walked the neighborhood that we lived in and I asked people, and I think I had to get $250 or $500 in sales. And I'm 7 years old and my mom's like, go out, go get we'll give you 50. Grandma's probably going to give you 25 to 50, but you have to raise the other, $200 to $400. And so I went out and every neighbor and walked the streets. And so I didn't even make the connection then that was my first experience of sales. That was my first really relational vulnerability. Sales is so vulnerable to go up and get rejected. And then it was the first seed of filmmaking to get this little point and shoot camera, which I don't think I ever used. I swear this thing was like the most poorly made, $5 item you could ever get. But the seeds were there. And so, yeah, that started this journey of working with bigger brands and all of the things that you shared. But really where it came from was just this love of people and this love of storytelling. And so at 12 years old, after a little bit more practice, after a little bit of, better cameras and better equipment, I think it was my 7th or 8th grade teacher gave the option to make videos instead of PowerPoints. And I was like, this is going to be amazing. This is my breakthrough moment right here. Terrible videos. I still have them somewhere. They're horrible. But if I had to say what the actual seed of creativity and storytelling and human connection, that was really the inciting moment there. And then from that point on, basically every class in end of middle school into high school was all videos. And it eventually led to my friend and I winning an AT&T competition when we were pretty young. And that's kind of a whole story in itself. But yeah, to go from kind of this rural suburban town to now, to really being a nobody in early elementary school to now working with leaders, it's an amazing gift. It really is. And I think the way you phrased it of helping people become better, not just getting more, I was in that position for 12 years where I thought that more videos, more equipment, more money, more revenue, more travel, more authority, more responsibility. I thought that more meant better, and it just doesn't. And I think there's so many leaders, and you could add a whole bunch of zeros at the end of their bank accounts, or a whole bunch of clients or cars in the garage or whatever it might be, and more doesn't work. There comes a point where you realize this isn't who I thought that I was becoming. This isn't who I want to be. This isn't enough. And the root place that I like to take people, that I had to end up falling, was the only satisfaction, the only depth, the only truth, the only hope, the only fulfillment in any of it is that we would cling to Jesus more, and that we would really spend time with Jesus. And I think a lot of leaders, particularly in this generation where there's so many things that distract us and there's so many things we can chase after, the things that we say that we value and the things that we actually do often don't align. And what happens is it creates incongruency, is what I call it. So you're pursuing things, you're getting things, you're making things, you're supporting leaders, but the things that you deeply value, the person that you actually want to be, is so far buried. And that chasm is often where I enter the conversation with leaders, that they're in this great position of authority, they've achieved wealth, they've hit a lot of the dreams that they wanted, and it wasn't what they thought. And it's my story. That's where I was about 5 years ago.
Wow. Well, there's so many places that I want to go, and we're going to do it. You said something that triggered a memory I haven't thought of in, probably 40 years. I also got a camera through selling popcorn through neighborhood things, and it was the worst camera. I just vividly remember 35 millimeter film, and it took pictures barely. So thank you for giving me a flashback in time. But it does, those things that happen, they're not accidental, they're intentional. They become these inflection points in time. And I love how it created an opportunity and a fascination for you to tell stories, because that's what we are. We're a collection of stories, and being able to share these stories that impact lives and change lives, our own. I mean, we're part of a story, but then we also get to share a story and be part of someone else's story. It's so cool. And I want to go into all kind of ways about the stuff that you're doing, but thanks for sharing your story. I don't want to gloss over some of your success that led to where you were 5 years ago. I remember, a few weeks ago when you and I were talking, you're talking about, I got to work with a guy, you may not have heard of him, N.T. Wright. And, I'm sitting there going, oh my God, he wrote Paul, one of my favorite biographies of all time. How did that happen? You win this contest coming out of high school. What happened? What'd you do? How'd you get there?
Well, that contest was interesting. So it was my best friend and I were heavily into YouTube at the time, and YouTube was just at the kind of precipice of popping off. Mm-hmm. And so there wasn't this huge creator economy that there is around it. And I'm not big on YouTube. I just kind of follow the news around it. But it was prior to the generation that we're in now, where really any video that you could put on YouTube could potentially pop off, and there weren't the ad revenue wasn't there. They were doing these competitions and these huge industry funded events through different creators on YouTube. And so AT&T had this competition called Take Your Shot, and they brought in John Woo, who's a huge director now. They brought in 3 different YouTube channels that were some of the biggest filmmaking channels on the internet. And then they invited, I think it was 10,000 applicants or 7,000 applicants to write short stories that would then get filmed with these 3 different creators and then John Woo. And so my friend and I co-wrote a script, and ours was one of those 3 winners. And it was the beginning of what I saw as God's provision in my life, and the tension of a path that would not be fruitful. So both things were true. So my friend actually, and it's a painful part of my story, but my friend signed the documents in his name, went off to LA without me. And so within that same month, or maybe 6 weeks or so, God provided NT Wright as the client that I got. My friend won the competition, signed the papers, went off to LA. We co-wrote the script, and he sent somebody from LA to train me in filmmaking, and then I got NT Wright as a client shortly after. It was this bifurcating moment between, am I going to chase this thing? Am I going to hold on to bitterness? Am I going to hold on to the judgment and the resentment of this? Or am I going to faithfully go in the direction God wants me to go in? And yeah, he provided NT Wright. So I was editing videos. I was very rarely, but occasionally writing course content and kind of setting up the back end of how the courses were structured. But it was me, pastor out of Wisconsin, and Tom Wright, and we were just bootstrapping this company, this 501c3 out of Southeast Wisconsin, and we produced somewhere in the ballpark of like 450 videos, 35 courses, and it did incredibly well. I don't follow it super closely now. I've been removed from it for a few years, but when I left, we were in like 160 different countries. We had 200,000 students across the globe, and we were hosting events globally so that people could come and hear Tom speak or hear other theologians interact. And so it was a really exciting period to build this thing. And that was, but it really, the seed of it was, Sean, are you going to listen? And even though there's this really painful thing that just happened, are you going to trust that I have something good for you coming? And that I'm still faithful to you. I'm still good to you. And so that was 16. And I was truly a gift to get to work with Tom and to build this thing. And I was good, but I wasn't that good that I should be working with Tom Wright. So I attribute a lot of the process to the Lord on that one.
Well, there's this tenet of, just being ready whenever you're tapped on the shoulder. And I love how you navigated from what could have been a place where so many people get derailed forever. Like they never recover from some great transgression or betrayal, and they allow that to define them, as opposed to going, that's not going to define me. I'm going to trust in what this can be. Yeah, and that kind of leads into one of the questions I wanted to ask as we build your story and we build an understanding of your story. What you just said may or may not be an answer to this, but what's one leadership belief or a principle that you live by? And and what's the story behind it? Maybe it's that one, maybe it's another one, but what's a leadership belief or principle that you live by and the story behind it?
Yeah, I was thinking about this beforehand. I would say there's 2 that are pretty competing principles. One is John 15. Jesus talks about, I am the vine and you are the branches. And I think that we, in the leadership space, find pruning to be a very difficult process to go through. And yet it's one of the things Jesus talks about, and he talks about it as being a really beautiful, good thing. There was a Italian, and I'm sure variations of this are still around, but there was an Italian rose grower who would grow competition roses. And the way that they grow roses to win the competition is incredible sacrifice. So basically you plant a bunch of roses in the garden, and you start identifying features and different things about the roses as they start to bloom and grow. And the difficult thing about getting the winning rose, rather than just getting a bouquet of roses, is every single other rose in that garden plot has to be cut down for that one to win the competition. And it's this beautiful metaphor I think of precision, and I think a lot of leaders resonate with this metaphor a lot. It's hit me so many different times in my journey that, much like John 15, that he prunes branches that don't produce fruit, Jesus speaking, much like that, the rose grower is pruning roses that are not going to win. And so I would say that is the defining leadership principle for me is whenever I feel like I'm in a situation or season of life or something's going on in business where I just can't seem to figure out what's going on, I go back to John 15 and I'm like, okay, Jesus, you're pruning things around me. I don't know if I can see them yet or fully understand them yet, but you're pruning me to be the championship winning rose. I need to be okay with, or help me be okay with, letting go of the other roses. And so that principle has really stuck with me. I would say the second one is just the wilderness of the whole book of Exodus, the Israelites getting taken out of the wilderness. They always go from, this is true for us as well, but the Israelites were going from Egypt, from comfort to discomfort to redeemed comfort. And that's kind of our process. And you can kind of substitute comfort for different words, but they're going from something familiar to the unfamiliar to now redeemed familiarity. And they didn't have to work hard for it. They didn't have to strive to get to the promised land. The wilderness was the testing period, was the purifying period. And as we read the story, realize like the Israelites were not great at being purified. They didn't want to be the championship winning rose, in the wilderness process. But God used all of the suffering, all of the pain, all of the wilderness, all of the dry heat, all of the manna to purify his people so that they could receive what was next. And so I think those two principles in tandem in business are more rare to hear that, but those have been game changing for my journey and for a lot of the leaders that I work with. I don't think we think about absorbing and reflecting on the things that we have to let go of to get to the next stage.
That is so profound. So many things come to mind, and I couldn't agree with you more. I mean, and I've been very guilty of this through most of my life, of wanting to hold on to too many things, wanting to hold on to too much. And then certainly not scriptural, but, Warren Buffett's, famous quote of, the most successful people say no to almost everything. The ability to say no and to understand that it is the pruning that where it matters, and it's not comfortable. Like, I love how you pull these two metaphors or stories together. It's not comfortable to be pruned. It's necessary to be prize winning, to be the best, to get focused. And I do, like most of the most successful people I know have been the ones who have said, I can ignore everything that isn't the thing, whatever it is that's driving my purpose and trying to achieve. Growth isn't comfortable. If you're comfortable, it's not growth. Like, it's supposed to be uncomfortable. And, that's where the refining is happening. That's the crucible. That's where all these things, the impurities are being baked out. I love how you've woven those together. Now, are these easy? Does that mean since you know these things that it's just like, oh, okay, I got it, and it makes life simpler, easier, or more comfortable?
I really want to give the vulnerable answer to that. The arrogant version of me wants to say yes because I've walked the wilderness journey so many times. I know the principles of the rose. And so there are periods where I can very clearly identify, like, man, Sean, you were just being so boastful and arrogant, and you thought you had this all figured out. And so I do think there's like an unhealthy bent towards, once we feel like we've got something, we think we can have it in every single season in perpetuity and always have it figured out. I do think there are healthy seasons or healthy periods of time where I have self-identified and I know I'm like, hey, I am in a pruning season right now. I am in a championship winning, rose garden kind of experience at the moment. And I've been accurate. So I would say both are true. I think when we start to identify anything, especially in the leadership space, often we are right, and being right actually holds us back in certain seasons, and being right can be helpful in certain seasons. So it's such a weird dichotomy to try to hold those two things together, and to have the 30,000-foot wisdom to go, yes, it's time to be very bold and very honest and very thoughtful and very true to what I'm assessing. And then other times to feel like, I don't know if I have this figured out, and I might be in a pruning season right now, and I don't know, and I don't want to be arrogant, and I want to hold this loosely. I've done both. So I can tell you I'm in a wilderness pruning season right now, and it is super uncomfortable. And it's not like a, wow, I've got everything figured out kind of season. It's I'm learning to let go of things. I'm learning to especially money, thousands of dollars on coaches and investments, and just seeing it outflow. I'm like, man, my garden's getting smaller. I'm throwing away all these roses. Like, what's going on? Both can be true in certain seasons, and just to have the humility to say, like, yes, I'm confident that this is true right now and this is right, or I don't know, I'm not sure. This is what I think is happening. The arrogance, I think, is more the challenge with the leadership space, that we can get so attached to an idea or a methodology or a tool or something that has been revealed to us, and we think that applies in perpetuity, or that we've got it all figured out.
Agree with you. I think it's, something you said strikes me as there's the ability to hold the two lenses in view at the same time, the long view, the eternal view, and then the short view. And it's so hard to be able to zoom out when you are, right in the moment, that when you're in a place of tension or discomfort, to be able to zoom out and say that is temporary because I have an eternal lens, or I'm looking for a longer view. It's hard. And I do struggle with personally, and then I've seen like a lot of people struggle with, like, the minute you think you have it all figured out, the minute you say, yes, I've arrived, I've got this, I'm smart, there's an opportunity for disruption, and it makes it harder for you to recover, and it makes it harder for you to get back on. So in many ways, like, success is wonderful, but it isn't guaranteed to repeat. So it's just about how do you navigate these seasons and be present in the season and appreciate the season and learn from the season. One thing that comes to mind is, as I think about this, I've seen and worked with people who spend so much time looking maybe at a third lens, which is a rear view mirror view, as opposed to a forward view. And they embrace a victim mentality versus a creator mentality. And I don't mean creator in the spiritual sense. I mean in a sense of, I can get to create forward from this experience, or from this discomfort, or from this, pruning. And instead, they're so caught in lamenting and feeling regret or challenge or whatever. So that's where it goes for me. It's like, I think it's tension, and I think there is supposed to be tension, and it is supposed to be in that tension that we have the opportunity to rise above or to give in, and we get to choose. That's why, for me, one of my favorite books, and I do read this annually, and it's because of what it means or signifies to me from a freedom of choice perspective, is Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, the opportunity between the stimulus and the response to choose and reframe and reflect. And I think it's hard. And to be able to do that well means I think you have to give up yourself. I think you have to surrender in order to do it well. And that's maybe even harder. Does that make any sense whatsoever?
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I was resonating with everything you shared. I absolutely resonate with it, but I've never heard anybody say it the way that you said, you said something like the tension is good, and the tension is actually a profitable thing. And I don't think we do a great job talking about the tension side of it. I would say that's the thing that actually draws me to leadership, to be in the leadership world, to be in the coaching world, is that there are so many nuances to the seasons we go through, and every person is a little different. And there are systems and there are tactics and there are pathways and there are all those things, but applying them to the wrong person or in the wrong season or applying them unilaterally may not be the right approach. And I think that like what you said, which is the tension is good, giving people space to actually engage with the tension of where they're at. How often do we go there as leaders and to say, hey, let's engage with the tension. Like let's speak into it. Let's put it to paper. Let's do something with it. Let's use it. You know, in particular, coming from a Christian background, I think it can either go heavily lament or heavily perfection. And I need to figure out everything and I'm not doing enough right. And there's this, we don't leave room for the tension. So I just really, really liked how you shared that.
Well, I'll have to look back at it and remember it, but it is, it's amazing. We're never going to have it all figured out. So life is going to be tension, and it's how we're predisposed to failure and flaws and sin. And so therefore we have to there's tension as a constant element, and it is the ability to navigate between the long view and the short view, the forever and the now. And I think that applies for leadership. Like if you make this secular and like super tactical, that's the path that leaders have to navigate, is like, what are we doing today versus where we want to be? And are we doing the right things? And it's a challenging, because leadership is lonely. And often we find that leaders are, and I'd love to hear your thoughts on this, especially when you talk about walking in the wilderness and that's such a gift, but leadership is lonely. And there's that cliche exists for a reason. Doesn't have to be. Like you can choose to walk alone, or you can choose mentorship and friendship and perspective from others. And I've found that those who are the most successful are never the ones who walked it completely alone. They have had someone else along for the journey, and they've been second in the journey in a lot of cases. They've been helping others along that path. So what are your thoughts? Like, and then I want to get back to your story about what you're doing now and how you got there. But while we're on this tangent, walking in the wilderness as a leader, what are your thoughts on that?
I am absolutely in alignment with what you shared, that to be, in most cases, to be lonely in the wilderness is a lack of decision-making, a lack of pragmatism, a lack of wisdom. But I think, based on working with leaders, based on seeing how I am, based on interviewing a number of people, I think the biggest thing is leaders get to a place where we don't want to be vulnerable and we don't want to take the mask off that we have it all figured out. And so I think that when that happens and we get to this, whether it's money or successes or big contracts or whatever the thing might be, when we're in a leadership position, we think that our strength comes from or is directly related to the output and the things that we're doing and how we're perceived. And it's a classic leadership, scenario. I think the root of it in myself, the root of it in others, is we either don't know or we don't want to be vulnerable in that moment and say, hey, we don't have it figured out. We're not doing well. This isn't as fun as we thought it was. I don't enjoy this. I'm overworked. I'm tired. Whatever the thing is. And to take off the mask feels like you're going to lose your leadership. And I would say there's a second piece to that, which is you still have to be a leader. So how do you be a leader and take your mask off? How do you take people, Moses, good example of the wilderness, like how do you be vulnerable and take people through the wilderness? There's an interesting story about Moses is taking on the request of the people, and he's basically this really wise leader. He's managing disputes. He's helping people manage their households and things that come up, and they're in the wilderness and it sucks and it's hard. And his father-in-law calls him out and says, Moses, you are working way too hard on the things that don't matter. You shouldn't be managing every single situation that comes up. Create a board of advisors, create some elders. They'll deal with all the daily problems. You need to spend time with the Lord. You need to go pray, and you need to lead the people with a vision. Moses creates this and he's like, oh, this is amazing. And then he goes and he can actually spend time doing the things that he talked about doing and the things that he was called to do. I think it's a lack of vulnerability, a fear of what happens to your leadership if you do become vulnerable. And it's also the misremembering what your calling is, or not understanding your calling to begin with, that often puts you into that position. I don't think it tends to be the tactical things. Those do stack up. In the leadership space, a lot of people like to wake up early, they like to do workouts, they like to read, they like to do a lot of things. I don't think it's the tactics, it's the posture of misremembering who we are, what we're called to do. And when we forget who we are and what we're called to do and where we're supposed to go, we have a really hard time saying no. So then the tactics start adding on, and we don't do the things that we're supposed to do as leaders. One of which is being connected to people. So I always like to tell people, part of it's the church, part of it's your spouse, if you're married, part of it's getting away with the Lord and spending time with the Lord. I like to say adventuring with God. And it's not just a throwaway statement. That this is, Jesus kind of modeled this behavior of, I'm going to go out into the wilderness and I'm going to pray. I'm only going to do what my Father tells me to do. So adventuring with God, obviously keeping yourself healthy, fit, physical, rest, food, all those things. But vulnerability is really at the center of that conversation. The ethos of a leader, I think, is tied up in who they are, who they're called to be, how vulnerable they can be, and the fulfillment of their calling.
That was rich. And here's a couple things that come to mind, because I'm in agreement. Like the vulnerability to say, well, there's something you said, like, hey, how are you vulnerable? And then also a leader and leading by example and not letting people know that you're afraid. Like that's a real tension that people have to struggle with. There's also this tension of the vulnerability of allowing yourself to go to the wilderness, go on the adventure, to take the time away because you're too important. Like, I can't afford to be away. I can't afford to take time off. And like, I'm guilty of that. I've struggled with that. I still do, because the to-do list is never going to end. It's not called a done list. It's a to-do list. It's not going to end. But in order to be vulnerable and put down the things that don't matter and give yourself time to do only the things that only you can do, the thinking time, the reflection time, that tension you need to navigate, it's so powerful. It's fundamental to being successful as a leader, giving yourself the space and the time to serve and to remember your purpose, because I agree with you, that's so important, and being able to connect the dots of why I'm here, who I serve, what I do, and how I impact the lives of others. Most leaders don't need more advice. They simply need clarity. That's what the Vision to Victory scorecard is all about. It's free, it's fast, and it gives you a clear picture of where you are and what's next. Start now at clarityalignmentexecution.com. Let's make sure that your next step forward is the right one. I want to get to what you're doing now, but 5 years ago, you said, hey, this wasn't even on your roadmap or your radar screen. 5 years ago, it was about this time we're dealing with this little thing called COVID. Walk me through that journey, and then how did you get to doing what you do today? And then I do want to understand and hear how you serve and what you're doing, but how did you get here? What was that journey like?
2019 was, I would say, one of the top successful years for me. So I was projecting to triple in 2020. It was going to be an incredible year. I'd already booked, I don't know, something like $150,000 in gigs by January. And these were, projects into the future, but all of that was through just the first couple months into 2020. And so I had all of these projects coming in, super high profitability, and it was going to be an amazing year. I would have had to figure out, how do I do taxes to make, with all this money that coming in. And what ended up happening was I had no clause in my contract for COVID, essentially, that I would still get paid for these projects. And so all of these major companies backed off, and I couldn't get any of the income from these projects. And it's obviously, you don't plan for worst case scenario, pandemic, coronavirus going around the world and projects canceling. And then a lot of my partnerships were with major marketing firms and agencies in the Metro Milwaukee and Chicago area. And a lot of them were letting their employees go because there was no work coming in. So it was just this crazy season of high expectation of this is going to be an incredible year, like double or triple the top year I've ever had in my business, to this is the worst year I've ever had. And I made less money, I think, in 2020 than I made working at a mega church. And so just the financial loss, the disappointment, the impact that I thought I was going to have too on these, a lot of these were nonprofit related projects. I would do a lot of work for Fortune 500s, and I would do a lot of, sports teams and medical clients. But my favorite work was coming in and telling stories of missionaries or nonprofits in the 53206 zip code in Milwaukee. And so just to have to cancel a lot of these things, and it wasn't cancel and then we can go back and film in 2 weeks and you're just not going to get paid. It was like, we don't know. We literally can't film for the next 9 months. Like, I don't know when we're going to be able to film based on some of the laws and some of the restrictions that were in place. So it was just such a strange period. And it was within 2 weeks, all my revenue for the next 9 months is gone. And this super profitable, somewhere between $250,000 to $500,000 a year is obliterated, and I don't know what to do. It really put me into this position of surrender, of essentially looking at the garden of roses and going, every single rose just got destroyed. Who am I? And what do I do? And where do I go? And what am I supposed to feel right now? And at the same time that happened, my wife is an occupational therapist now, but she had just graduated end of January, got her certification February. And then New York and New Jersey are the home of most of the huge medical corporations. And so they froze hiring nationwide for OT and PT and a number of other positions. So neither one of us had a career that we thought we were going to have, or the year that we thought we were going to have. And so and yet I'm so grateful for this period of my life, because it illuminated that the rose that I was trying to grow on my own wasn't healthy. It was never going to win the championship. It was sucking the life out of me. And I was doing a lot of 60 to 90 hour weeks. I wasn't building what I call a life-giving business now. And so my whole ethos around business building and entrepreneurship, particularly for solopreneurs and leaders, is to build businesses that support your life. We have the highest potential out of most people in the world to build businesses that are healthy, that are thriving, that allow every domain or every rose in the garden to bloom. And often what ends up happening is we build what I built, which was, I'm stuck in this thing 60 to 90 hours a week. I don't get breaks. My mind is never at ease. I don't know how to rest. I'm not spending time with the Lord the way that I say that I should be and want to be. My wife doesn't get the best of me. My business gets the best of me. And so it's all of these elements at play. And so 2020 was really God's hammer to my garden, and just crushing all the plants and going, this is not building on healthy soil. This is not a firm foundation. And I don't use this phrase lightly. It was me making an idol of myself and my work and my business. And it was time to stir it all up, crash it to the ground, and something new needs to come out of this season. And so out of that period came the leadership coaching. It was about a year later. So that whole year, 14-month period or so, from end of February of 2020 through maybe April of 2021, it was me on my face on the ground, praying to the Lord every day. And I think I read through the whole Bible 3 times or 2.5 times. And every single time in the Old Testament, I would highlight how the Lord says that he loves his people and he's with his people and he's for his people. And I had never seen that before. I'd heard about it. I'd heard people talk about it. I'd never felt it. I'd never seen it. And so that was kind of the start of that. And then midway through, I started posting on LinkedIn, and got connected to a bunch of leaders. I've been well networked for a while, so it wasn't about networking. It was just, I want to hear people's stories and I want to connect. And in the middle of that, 6 people back to back, all different people from different parts of the country, had this phrase that they said, and they would stop me mid-conversation and they would say, "Hey, Sean, this is going to sound weird. I think God wants you to speak, teach, and coach." And that happened 6 times in less than a month. Totally random people. They've never met each other. And I was like, what is going on? And by the 6th one, I'm in tears. And I'm like, okay, Lord, I'm going to go do this. What do you want me to speak, teach, and coach about? And the biggest thing that came out of that was the wilderness season. You've built Egypt. You've built this thing, and I am taking you away from your idols. I'm taking you away from your comfort, and I'm taking you into the wilderness. And you're going to meet me in the wilderness. You're going to encounter me in fresh ways. You're going to depend on me. It's not going to be easy. And I want you to take this concept to top level leaders. And so over the last 4 years, I've worked with Chick-fil-A, post-merger acquisition leaders, financial advisors at Merrill Lynch, C12 chairs. I mean, just a whole bunch of people, that entrepreneurs and just a number of leaders who've gotten to this place where they're rich in many areas, but they know the soil isn't healthy and it's not going to be healthy for the next season of gardening, and whatever that means. And that might mean they move to a new state. That might mean they open a new business. It might mean they close a business. It might mean they delegate some of the, who knows what that's going to look like. But they're in this position where they have built something successful by many of the material and worldly standards, by many of their own standards and dreams. And God is calling them into a period of wilderness, of I'm gonna reinvent who you are. I'm gonna build something new, and I want you to walk through this slowly. I don't want you to rush this process. I like to tell leaders the opposite of my story, which is don't wait until you're forced into the wilderness. Choose to do it. Like choose to enter it, because it goes a lot better for you if you do that. The story that most leaders are often afraid of sharing is their weakness and where they're struggling and what's really going on. So that's typically where we go, is we're going to spend a whole year really understanding who they are, what they've built, why they've built it, what they're hoping for with it, and then really asking the question, what is God doing with you and in it and for you?
Something you said in there that I haven't thought about before, but is now racing through my mind. It's easy to see the wilderness as a place where everything is bad. And, like you've lost your job or your money or whatever those things are. And in so many ways, the wilderness isn't the physical trappings. Like you're talking about people who have all of the things that are antidote to what most people would say is the wilderness, but the wilderness is in their heart. It is they're navigating this place of emptiness, because that's what the wilderness is. It's empty, it's hard, it's harsh. And being able to navigate that and remove the trappings that distract you from the growth is so powerful. I'm glad you're doing this work. I'm glad you're guiding people through this work, because it is a journey. And it goes back to that tension. There's something you were talking about. It reminds me of a book I read a few years ago that I love, The Comfort Crisis by Michael Easter. How we are as humans weren't built to be comfortable. We were built to be uncomfortable, and we do these things. And we live in a climate controlled world. We live in all these things. Our food is available. That's not what we were built for. We were built for discomfort. We create in discomfort. The parallel that I draw for what you're talking about is, in order to create, we have to go to the wilderness. And in order to become comfortable, we have to become uncomfortable. We have to do the misogi that allows us to do the very hard thing and become more. And it's only through that the rose blooms and the rest is dropped away and the real winner shines through. I'm so glad you're doing this work, and I'm going to continue to pull from you and on you and learn from you as you do this. And I have to imagine that you're a lot like me in this regard, and a lot of leaders, is that we most often teach what we need to learn. And so, and there's kind of two truisms, I believe. One, we often teach what we need to learn, and then it is when we teach that we can learn. And, I often ask people hey, what'd you learn and what are you going to teach? Because it's you teach something, you learn it and make it better. And I imagine that you're, as much as you're helping, you're also learning through this entire journey with every single person that you get to serve in your work.
I would even go far back and say every person that I've ever gotten to film with or tell their story, one of the more prominent, and it's a heartbreaking story, and then it's a redemptive story. So there's a beautiful ending to it. But there was this woman named Kelly, really sweet woman, and she was trafficked all throughout Milwaukee. And so I had, I think it was a day to come in and interview her for a couple hours and then film her B-roll story after and then piece it together. But I sat with her for almost 2 hours and just heard her heartbreak over herself. I don't know if it was one of the first times that happened, but just the tears that came, the freedom that came, the self-awareness that came from breaking over your own story and the things that happened to you. It was palpable in the room. And I've had a number of situations like that where I've interviewed these, pretty devastating stories on paper. And then even through the process of interviewing them, they're discovering things about their own healing and forgiveness and, next stage of life or whatever they're going towards. And we get to feel it as the production team and as they're going through it. And so just the gift of getting to carry that with me is huge. And so I learned a lot from her about really telling your own story in the most vulnerable way possible so that you can learn from you. Not that is 100% what you want to do all the time, but to lay everything in your heart out and then to almost see your heart sitting in front of you, across from you. And I like to say, what story would you tell if you sat across from yourself at a coffee shop? If you got to sit across from you and you got to receive that story from you, what would you hear? Really that question for me, which was if I were to sit across from myself at a coffee shop, who is Sean? Like, what would he tell? And what story would he want to share? And so I wrote an entire poem around that concept of sitting across from myself at a coffee shop. And so if somebody's listening to this, I think that's an interesting exercise, is to interview yourself as if you were sitting across from yourself at a diner or coffee shop or your favorite restaurant, and not to do the easy questions, not to, like you're not going to softball yourself. So what are the hard questions that you're going to ask? Like, why do I believe in God? Why do I believe in myself? Is what I'm building a net positive on every aspect of my life? And you could even do a 1 through 10 analysis on that and just go, is it a net positive in my faith, in my walk with Jesus? Is it a net positive in my marriage, in my business, in how I'm leading a team? And is it a net positive on my kids and in who they get to see their leader, their parent be? To learn from yourself, to learn from a future version of yourself, like Matthew McConaughey likes to talk about I'm competing with a 10-year version of myself. To learn from wise advisors, to learn from mentors. I think one of the challenges in leadership is identifying the voices of who you're going to learn from in that season. And every season has a kind of a different voice that is the most prominent or the most accurate or the most unbiased voice. And that's the voice that we should seek out. So sometimes it is the leaders that I lead, and they're like going deep into their story and how they built companies and who they are and how their families are structured. And I'm like, gosh, this is amazing. This is so cool. And I'm serving you, and this is amazing. And I'm receiving more than maybe I'm giving in this moment. And if I could give a tactical thing attached to this, it really is to assess the voices that you're absorbing in and ensure that everything that you're doing as a leader is a net positive in as many domains as you possibly can in the season that you're in. a tall order, but I think it's a beautiful exercise to really ask, what voices am I listening to? Is this a net positive? And am I building something that is really life-giving?
We know that vulnerability is important, but to be vulnerable and authentic with yourself, to do that across the table exercise and ask yourself the tough questions, the real questions, and then to be vulnerable and authentic and go, I don't have it all figured out, or I am worried about this, or whatever that, this, I don't know why I believe what I do, or whatever it is. Man, that's hard. And it goes back to this place of tension, and it goes back to, surrender, and it goes back to the need to serve others in what we do. Sean, we could talk for hours more, and I know that we will in future conversations. I want to switch us to some rapid fire questions if I could. And
I love it.
I will throw a few at you. Some of them I didn't send you in advance, so good luck.
I'll do my best. It'll be fun.
What's a book that you believe every leader should read?
The first one is Living Fearless by Jamie Winship. It's a faith-based book. It's a guy who grew up as a police officer and moved his whole family to Afghanistan.
Oh, wow.
Just the ability to live a bold, spirit-filled life. The second one is It's Not Your Business to Succeed. Brandon West is a good friend of mine. He's a C12 member. He runs a marketing firm down in Florida. And the whole book is around really similar elements to what we're talking about today, which is wilderness seasons, losing things, pruning branches, gardening, seeing the fruit and seeing the beauty and seeing the qualitative metrics, even when the quantitative metrics don't match. So his whole title is It's Not Your Business to Succeed. And he's talking about the metrics that the world measures on, profit, margin, speed, whatever. Those may not be the correct metrics for the season that you're in, or in totality. And then the last one is A Failure of Nerve. This is a very unique book, really makes you think differently about who you are as a leader. It's very abrasive in its language. You might agree with it, you might not agree with it, but I think the principle behind it is to question everything, to question who you are, what you're doing, how fast you're moving, why you're doing things. I think he was a rabbi and a family therapist, but he's also worked as a consultant and public speaker throughout DC and across the world, and has led companies. And so his framework is very rich and deep, but it's antithetical to everything that you think you know about being a leader.
I love that. Well, I appreciate that. And, selfishly, this question, I do send it in advance because I want people to put thought into it, because I'm always looking for a new book to read. And, if I can get, a couple good nuggets, and I haven't read any of those three, so they're going on my book list, and we'll put them in the show notes for the audience so they can have access to those as well. Okay. What's one daily practice that makes you better for serving others?
I don't know if it's completely a daily practice, but every day that I possibly can. So yesterday was a good example of this. I try to go hiking. So I try to embody what I talk about in being in the wilderness. And so I'm going hiking after this podcast, and we've got a couple hiking spots within a 20-30 minute range of our house. So I would say 4 to 5 days a week I'm getting out and I'm spending time. And it's not just the hiking. That's a great thing to do. You can really move your body anywhere and go walking anywhere. The principle behind it is I'm getting away with the Lord, and I'm not just doing it on a chair, which I love reading at home. I've got a little comfy nook to go to read the Bible in the morning, but I'm really getting away, and I'm trying to posture myself partially to receive, partially to let go. But I'm also just posturing myself to see something differently that is not in the mundane. And it's a gift. It's an incredible gift to use our legs, to use our bodies, to be outside, to see the sunshine. And so just taking advantage of those moments. But it's also the place where I typically get the, business wisdom or new ideas or new initiatives. And those things come to me on the trail. Sometimes it's just a moment to look at the flowers and just stare at the flowers for 5 minutes and appreciate the beauty of the reality of nature in front of you.
I love that. Good for you. What's a decision-making principle that you always return to?
I love 1 through 10 tools. And so I've actually created I call it the 12E tool. It's the worst name in the world. I should come up with a better name for that. But it's 12 questions, 1 through 10 analysis. And at the end of it, I get a little feedback around, is this a good idea? Is this a good thing to pursue? And so it's 12E words. So energy, enjoyment, enrichment, effort, there's these 12 E's that go into this. And the questions are, does this give enjoyment? Do I get energized doing this thing? Is this going to provide money? Is this going to impact people? And so I would say I don't know if it's so much a principle as much as a tactic, but that's a tactic that I use quite often. Every couple days, I'm going through and I'm asking myself, is this thing fruitful? Is this thing worth pursuing? Not that it's every single time about the numbers, but the number gives a good indication of like, hey, I'm at a 40 out of 120. Probably shouldn't pursue this thing right now.
I love that. Being able to quantify sometimes the quality of things so you can really zero in on what's good or what's not. That's powerful. Yeah, I'm going to have to pick your brain on that one some and deploy that myself. And if that's something you have available, then and share with others, then happy to make that available. What's a cause or an organization that you're passionate about supporting?
We love supporting anything anti-sex trafficking, anti-human trafficking. So there's an organization called The Net in Fort Worth, and they help women. You could say heal, but it's a rehabilitation program, employment program, where they come in and they actually work on ethically made jewelry and candles and all sorts of different things. And so we really like The Net in Fort Worth. There's a similar organization in Milwaukee called Hope Street. Mm-hmm. And they're all about bringing in men, women, and children off the streets. And so this is more like homeless rescuing than as much as sex trafficking. But they bring in men, women, and children, and they house them, and they do community breakfast and worship, and they train them on college degrees and job applications and all sorts of things. And so, yeah, really, I mean, anything involving homeless and anti-sex trafficking is really where our heart's at. I would add that my wife and I really love working with special needs, and that's kind of a really sweet spot in our lives. And so we're actually looking for a new organization with special needs. So if anybody knows anything and wants to send me information on that, we'd love to research some organizations doing some great work with special needs.
Awesome. We'll make sure that call to action goes out there. Well, where can our audience connect with you, or where can they learn more about you and your journey and what you do to serve?
Yeah, it'd be an honor to connect with you. I am on LinkedIn at Sean Keller. So if you just type in SeanKeller on LinkedIn, you can find me there. My website is wilderstory.com, WILDER story.com. Would love to meet with you, hear your story, and just kind of shake hands virtually and see if there's a way that we can support each other and meet each other. But ultimately, it comes down to storytelling. So I love sharing stories with others.
Awesome. Well, Sean, I am so appreciative of you taking time to share your story with us and with our audience. And, one of the things that I'm very committed to is I don't believe that leaders are all the CEOs. Leaders are, as John Maxwell says, leadership is influence, nothing more and nothing less. And the influence of one human being can have on another through the sharing of their story, the commitment of their vision, their purpose, their passion into others is influence. And so I am deeply grateful for you sharing your story and your influence with us so that we can serve others and our audience can take these lessons and these tools that you've learned and impact the lives of others, man. So just thank you so much. And I'm so delighted that, we've crossed paths and that I get to learn from you. So thank you.
Dusty, thank you. Man, it's an honor to know you as a friend and podcast host and business owner and all the hats you wear. But thank you for this. This is a gift.
Hey, before you go, if this episode helped you see leadership differently, I have 3 personal requests. First, and this is the most important one, share this with one leader who needs it. Think of someone in your network who's frustrated with their team's execution or is trying to scale their own impact. Copy this episode link right now and text them, "Hey, I just listened to this episode and I think you'll get real value from it." That simple act of sharing, that is servant leadership in action. Second, subscribe to Leadership Unlocked. Whether you're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or your favorite podcast player, just hit subscribe or the follow button. That way you won't miss the next episode and it helps us reach more leaders like you. And third, if you're willing, this would be a huge help for us. Leave a 5-star rating and write a quick review. I know it takes 60 seconds of your time, but here's what it does. It helps other leaders discover the show. Every rating, every review, it's how we expand our impact together. So those 3 things: share with a friend, subscribe, leave a review. I'm deeply appreciative, and that would give us so much help. Thanks for being part of the Leadership Unlocked community. Now go create some clarity for others.